Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg. Today I'm going to do something a little different, which is instead of review fountain pens, I'm going to talk about eBay. Keep in mind, I am not affiliated with eBay, and none of the advice here should be taken so seriously that you scream at me because you got some kind of a bum deal. I'm hoping that this will be helpful to people who are thinking of buying fountain pens, but don't buyer beware. That's the major idea. This video is inspired by the great Stephen Brown, who just recently posted a video of how to sell pens or where you should sell your pens. And I was thinking, I don't do selling of pens very much, but maybe I will soon, but I don't. But I spend an enormous amount of time looking at eBay ads and every now and then buying something on auction or buy now. And I think, particularly if you're starting out in this hobby, it may be intimidating. You think, well, is it safe to buy things on eBay? And how do you know whether you're going to get a good deal if you can't try out the pen? So here are some of my tips. Now of course, it's always safest to buy a pen from a reputable dealer. I've bought pens from Goulet, which I think are very good, or Pen Chalet, or of course even going to a standalone store. Or another great place to buy pens is during a pen show, which I recently did, where you can actually try the pen out and talk to the people who are selling the pens. So that's great. Unfortunately, they only have pen shows every now and then, or ones that you can get close to, and so I wish they had them every week. So eBay is my pleasure. I often, when I'm falling before I go to bed, I'm looking on my iPad at various deals and thinking, should I bid on this or should I not buy this? I'm big friends. I prefer sort of to buy it now thing where rather than trying to go, wait days and days and figure out what point you should bid on something. Keep in mind, today I'm not going to talk about bidding, and there are plenty of YouTube videos and all kinds of advice about when you should bid and how you should bid and programs to help you bid. That's a different thing. I would say that if you are, just like any auction, don't get carried away. Decide way ahead of time what it is, how much you want to pay, and don't go beyond that, because you can get carried away in an auction and spend more money than you plan to, even if it's not a physical auction where people are jumping up and down. You can sort of get into a bidding war, and that can be bad. But today I'm more going to talk about how do you know the difference between a good deal and a bad deal from reading the descriptions or reading about the person who is selling. Also, why buy a used pen at all? Why not just buy new pens? Well, one of the things that I've noticed about fountain pens that is sort of interesting about them, and in some ways wonderful, is you can buy the same fountain pen. I've had this happen with Lamy Safaris, and one pen will write beautifully and the next one won't, right? But if you buy a fountain pen, a used fountain pen from somebody who's really reputable, from a collector, let's say, or a really good vintage pen dealer, they will have tuned the pen or will know that the pen writes really, really well. And so in some ways it's actually superior than buying a new pen. I think so. And there's also something kind of wonderful about getting a pen that somebody else used and wrote in their journal or has a whole history. Having a pen that is 100 years old, I think there's something really wonderful and exciting about that. So used in this case can often be better. Also, keep in mind that any particular pen dealer who's selling new pens is often only selling the latest things, and there are plenty of pens that are no longer being made, or in certain models of the pen or editions of the pen that you can only get used. So that's another reason for getting used. eBay is such a popular source for pens that a lot of the same dealers, like Gold Spot Pens, actually sell pens on eBay. So that's just another indication, both, how good eBay is, in fact. eBay has all kinds of protections now for the buyer and the seller. So that's another very good thing. It's really important that the description be accurate, and eBay guarantees that the description should be accurate. And also, eBay sellers are very, very careful that they don't get bad reviews. They really want to make you happy, because once you get a rating that begins to fall below 98%, and people won't buy from you. So, you have actually a lot of power when you're the buyer. And as I said, the description must be accurate. So here are some of my suggestions. Now, number one, if I'm buying a used pen, for the most part, I buy them from the United States, right? Because in terms of returns, it's just so much easier. That obviously is not the case if you're buying new pens like Asian pens. So Chinese pens many are sold on eBay, and I bought a lot of them for very low prices. The thing about buying those pens, they often take very long time to get to you, but that sort of becomes sort of the pleasure of it. You sort of forget that you ordered them, and you ordered some pen that was $8. So I might have done it at 3 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep, and then a month and a half later I get a pen, and I sort of like that. It's kind of wonderful. And 95% of the times, the pens that I've gotten, particularly Chinese pens, write really well, and they're great. And you can read the reviews on YouTube, which are the good ones and which are the bad ones. So that's obviously a whole other thing. There's also the fact that you can buy Japanese pens, high-end pens, Pilot pens in particular, or Sailor pens from Japanese dealers. Even, interestingly enough, German, because the Asian market is such a huge market for fountain pens. They use fountain pens so much, that for whatever reason, you can often get German pens from Japanese pen dealers. And because of the exchange rate or whatever, they can be really good deals. Also, for some reason, pen companies sell their pens for different prices in different markets. So that's another thing about buying, particularly Pilot pens are much less money if you buy them from Japanese dealers. The problem may be, though, that the warranty will not be honored if you bought it through a dealer who's not in the United States. So that's something to keep in mind about in terms of warranties. I've already said, why buy used? I think sometimes used is superior. Now, there's the other thing, though. Of course, in a pen show, you can try the pen out, and that's a good way to find out, whether the nib is smooth or scratchy right away. But one thing you don't find out right away anyway is if a pen, for pages has problems. So I've gotten, unfortunately, several times I've gotten pens that write initially well, but then you find out that they dry out after a few pages. That is often the case when a pen, it seems to me, has been left for a long time with ink in it and it's dried out. And people have tried to clean it out, but not thoroughly. And they may think that the pen writes well because they try it out, they dip it in the ink, or, they try it out for just a few sentences and it seems to write well, but in fact it doesn't. Now, you're not going to discover that at a pen show either. So the key thing in a description or buying a pen at eBay is, can you return it? So in the description, very clearly it will say whether you can return it and how long you have to return it. It is clearly much better to buy a pen that you can return if there's something wrong with it. And the best dealers sell pens with that idea, right? Sometimes they will charge you for returning it, and sometimes they will even say free returns, and that's the best thing. So that's something to look for. Can you return the pen? Often a private person who's selling a pen, let's say if I were selling a pen, don't want to hassle with having to return the thing and all that. So they will say you cannot return the pen, right? It will actually say that, right? And they should include a very clear description of the state of the pen, along with photographs of the pen showing you what it looks like. Now, and the other thing, of course, is there's a rating for the particular person who's selling the pen, and you should look at the rating, see from the rating how many how much have they sold, right? You can also click on the person, the name of the person, their nickname or whatever it is, and where the rating is, and that will send you to their store, and you can check on the other items they're selling. So ideally, if you're buying from somebody who's a dealer, and certainly if you're buying it from a dealer, you should see that they're selling a lot of other pens, right? And what kind of pens they're selling. And you should also be able to see how many pens they've sold. So some of the people that I've bought pens from, they've literally sold thousands of pens and have fantastic ratings, and I've had wonderful experiences with them. When you're buying from a private person who, is just selling one pen, you're less likely going to have a good experience because it's a good chance that they may have inherited the pen, or maybe somebody gave it to them, or it's been sitting in a drawer because they were giving it to them for their bar mitzvah and they haven't used it for 20 years. And those are the pens that are problems because they look beautiful. They're mint, right? Because nobody's used them, but the ink is dried in them. And they may not know how to properly clean them. So those are ones that are potentially great bargains, but they also may be duds. And obviously another thing is if you're somebody who fixes pens and you know how to take pens apart and fix them and do wonderful things to them, you may be looking for pens that don't work that you can repair. But if you're like me, you want to get a good pen that writes well. That's when you're beginning to get into trouble if the description says, one, they're not going to return it, and here's something that really you should be a red flag, is when they say that they don't know anything about pens and they haven't tried it. That, to me, is probably means don't go there. That's not going to be a good deal. There's going to be something wrong with that pen. I guess it matters, how much it's going to go for, and it depends on what risk you're willing to take. I'm sure that there are lots of people out there who've gotten fantastic deals that way. I've just been really lucky. But I think there's something very suspicious about somebody who's selling something that they haven't tried. I mean, you wouldn't buy a car that nobody has driven, right? I don't think you should buy a fountain pen that's used that nobody knows whether it writes or not. A vintage pen that nobody has tried, let's say that it's a piston filler, very likely has a sac that is dried out. And that's not unusual. And again, often people who are trying to buy vintage pens know how to replace the sac, and they want to get pens that they can restore themselves. So that can be a terrific deal. But you can pretty much guess that if you're buying a pen that's 100 years old and it originally had a sac in it, that the sac is probably dried out. I myself have replaced the sac, so it's not something that's impossible to do, but that's something to keep in mind. The description should say whether the pen writes. And if it says the pen writes well, it should write well when you get it. And if it doesn't write well, it doesn't matter if the eBay person says they won't take a return. They must abide by the description. So if the description says the pen writes well, then you have recourse, and you should then contact the buyer and say, the seller, and say, you said in the description it writes well, but it doesn't. Can I return it, or can you fix it? Ask them, what am I going to do now? And 9 out of 10, the situation, they will make it good. I've had situations where I've complained and the person said, I will give you your money back, and you don't even have to return the pen. They are so worried that you're going to give them a bad review. And also, it often isn't done with any malicious intent. People just don't know about fountain pens. Those are often the people, when you look at their store, they're selling shirts and old cassette players, old Walkman cameras, and they happen to sell a fountain pen as well. They just don't know what they're selling, and they don't know that would be a problem, and they're doing it with the best intention, and they just don't want to deal with returns. That's why they don't want to include that in their descriptions. Now, another red flag that I've noticed is that some sellers will say something like, don't pay any attention to the description. The photographs is really what the pen is all about. Now that sounds fine, but I think what they're really doing there is they don't want to be held to a description, right? And the problem is that photographs of fountain pens only tell you so much, and often they're not completely clear, and they certainly aren't going to tell you whether the pen writes or not. They're just going to tell you whether the pen looks good. A really good combo of description and photographs should include a writing sample. Unfortunately, even really good some vintage pen dealers don't include writing samples. However, they should include the ability to return the pen. But if you have a situation where somebody's selling you a vintage pen, let's say it's a flex pen, and it doesn't include a writing sample, and they won't let you return it, I think that's very problematic. Now, I mention a flex pen, a vintage flex pen, let's say a Waterman 52, because flex nibs, really run the range in terms of how they flex. So if you're an artist like me, you probably want a flex nib that goes from a fine or extra fine to, let's say, a bold. You really probably don't want a flex pen that goes from a medium to a stub-like line, or let's say certainly not a bold to a stub. You want to have, it's very important with the range of the flexing. And you're only going to see that if there's a writing sample, or you can try, or if you can try the pen out itself. I suppose you could, if the description was very explicit, maybe that would work. But it just worries me if a pen dealer is writing such an explicit description, why don't they include a writing sample? Now, my biggest problem that I've had with a few pens has been the problem that the person who sold it didn't really use the pen enough, didn't write with enough. And right now I'm having an issue that I think is going to be resolved, where the dealer admitted that the pen I got, he had not written pages with it, so he didn't realize that it would just run out of ink after a page or two. And he has taken the pen back, and he's going to fix it, supposedly, and we will see if it will be fixed. So that's one of the real issues with used fountain pens, because it's hard if you selling a lot of pens to write with them all and know how they're working. Now, that's why, to me, one of the better sources for buying a pen is someone who's not necessarily a dealer, but is a collector. And that's another thing to look for in the descriptions. Often in the descriptions there will be, it will say something like, this is a really nice pen, but it's not my taste in terms of the size of the pen, or I have 3 of these and I decided I only need 2. So it explains to you why the person is selling it. And when you read a description like that, you're aware that this is somebody who really understands and knows fountain pens. In my experience, those are the best people to buy fountain pens, after dealers, because, well, first of all, they tend to sell their pens, or can't sometimes sell them for less money. Often they'll sell it, buy it now, which I really like. And also I think there's something kind of wonderful about passing on the pleasure for the pen to another collector that is going on there that is really kind of nice. So that's sort of the thing that I'm looking for. I have succumbed to pure greed buying pens that from people who are less. I'm not less sure about them, who may only have one or two pens. I remember a few months ago I bought two Opus 88 demonstrator pens, and they came and they were not properly cleaned, and they didn't have Opus 88 nibs. They had Goulet pen nibs on them, which are Jovo nibs too, so they're very similar. And in the end, it was great. They're great pens, but I had to really clean them out, and but it all worked out because they were a pretty good deal. So the whole thing. One of the things I would say about it is that I'm not buying the ads for pens that are $1,000. I would really worry about buying a pen like that on eBay. I think the place to buy a pen like that would be at a pen show with somebody you really know or a friend of somebody you know, where you can really try out the pen and you can return it. I would not be buying things like that on eBay. For the most part, I'm not risking my life savings on a particular pen. So if something bad happens, maybe I'd be out $100. That's some money. I'd be upset, but it's not the end of the world. One other thing I've noticed on eBay, and this is probably has more to do with eBay in general, but something to worry about, is I think there are some people who will purposely run ads for pens at a much higher price than they could possibly really sell for. And that might be a way to sell, they might have several pens of the same make. And then, then you think you're getting a bargain if you buy the pen for $40 because this is an ad for the pen for $120, right? So I suppose you should watch that. I think one of the things about buying fountain pens on eBay is that in general, if you're somebody who's a crook and you're trying to sell things to people and make money, I wouldn't think you'd go into fountain pens to do it. I mean, I would think there would be much more easier things to fool people on. As a curator, I know for a fact that one of the things that people try to sell are fake art, which you can try to, make quite a lot of money on. And it's very, very hard to evaluate whether something is a real drawing or not from looking at pictures at it. And I can tell you from, looking through eBay and seeing things that people try to sell as art by famous artists, it's just, it's crazy. It's like the Wild West. People are just selling reproductions and pretending they're real. Fountain pens, I just don't think that that's the best place to be in if you're going to try to cheat people. But there are fake Mont Blancs out there, and there are YouTube videos about buying Mont Blanc pens and why you should really be afraid to buy that. If you are in the market for those kinds of expensive pens, make sure that you can return them. Make sure that you know the difference between a real one and a fake one. That's really where buyer should beware. And I would never buy an expensive fountain pen like a Mont Blanc, which I know there are a lot of fake ones out there on eBay where you would not be allowed to return it. So that's something to be aware of. I think that's it. I've gone on for quite a while. I think the other thing is, I'm a great in general. I have friends who say, who are surprised that I will buy something on Amazon and return it. And Amazon is fantastic about returns, really easy about returns. I believe that if you buy something and it doesn't work right and it's not good, you should return it. So, if you're somebody who has bought something and it doesn't fit the description or doesn't work, I don't understand people who buy pens from really expensive companies, and when the nib doesn't write, they tinker with it rather than return it. It seems to me if you got a pen that doesn't write, you should return it from somebody. So don't be afraid to complain that if you got a pen that was a dud. I think that's really important. And eBay really has created this very good system for dealing with that when there is some problem. And as I say, it almost always works out that that if I get a bad pen, that I have a recourse. Okay, I'm sure people have other tips. I probably have miss something. You could add it to the comments. You could do your own video. Let me please ask you, as always, to subscribe if this has been helpful. Let me know what you think, and I will continue reviewing. I don't have a drawing to do that goes with this. I suppose I could draw somebody bidding on eBay, but I think I'll pass on that. And have once again a Happy New Year. Thank you.